Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and a very warm welcome if you're new. The doll that we're making today is quite different from anything I've made before, but I'm really proud of her and I'm so excited to share her with you. I hope you'll like her too. It's one of my New Year's resolutions to push myself out of my comfort zone a bit more, so I want to do something new or challenge myself in some way with every doll I make this year. And boy oh boy were some parts of this doll a challenge. But more on that later. If you're a millennial like me, you probably remember the jelly tech craze of the late 90s and early 2000s. During that time, a lot of companies, including Apple, came out with technology that was plastic, see-through, and usually came in a wide variety of colors. I remember all of this very fondly, and to this day, I still consider this peak tech design. I would do anything for modern technology to go back to looking like this. There's something about the colors and being able to see the innards of a device that just makes me feel like... But if there's one blobject, one piece of jelly tech from the late 90s and early 2000s that I love and yearn to possess above all others, it is the iMac G3. These beauties first came out in 1998 in the color Bondi Blue. And it was a revolutionary moment for Apple because it was their first official iMac. The following year, in 1999, Apple released the Fruit Colors lineup of iMac G3s, for which they created one of the most iconic ads in computer history. There were a few different versions of this computer that came out between 1998 and 2003 when they were ultimately discontinued. Because this computer holds such a special place in my heart, I have wanted to make an iMac G3 computer head doll for many years now. And today's the day! But I'm not doing this alone. While in the middle of working on this doll, my friend Electric Bunny shared a work in progress picture in my Discord where she happened to be working on the exact same project. This was not planned at all, and neither of us knew that the other was making an iMac head doll too, but once we realized, I was like, collab? And she said yes. So today's video is a special collab with the talented Electric Bunny. Be sure to stick around until the end to see how her doll came out. For my doll, I chose the pink iMac G3, which was called Strawberry, apparently. I also wanted her outfit to be inspired by the 90s and early 2000s, so I decided she should have a pastel windbreaker and a metallic skirt, both clothing items that were very popular around this time. Let's use this G3 Frankie as a base. Their pink bionic leg would go perfectly with a pink iMac head, and I think their blue skin will really complement the pink. Before we do any body modding though, let's start with the clothes. I drew up a paper pattern and cut the pieces out of light pink, blush pink, and light purple fabric. Let's start with the pockets. Start by hemming the top of the pocket where the opening will be. Then line them up with the back panel of the pocket and sew them together at this short seam. You should now have two panels that look like this. Sew those to the two shades of pink fabric that will be above them on the jacket. I used a top stitch on the lighter fabric so it lays down nice and flat, and for the darker pink I want to attach a thin blue ribbon. With the front panels done, we can move on to the sleeves, which are sewn together in basically the same way. But they also need cuffs. Start by gathering the purple fabric until it's the same length as the cuff piece. Then sew the cuff to the sleeve right sides facing in. Once you flip it over, it should look something like this. Repeat that for the other sleeve. After top stitching the cuffs, the sleeves can be attached to the front panels at this diagonal seam. The back panel of the jacket is just a plain piece of pink fabric, so the sleeves can be attached to the diagonal seam on that piece as well. At this point I realized I would need to gather the shoulders because they were way too big on the doll. It's good to check every now and then how the clothes you're busy making would fit on the doll, and sometimes you have to make decisions on the fly like this. It looks much better this way. And then we just repeat that for the other sleeve. Now you can flip the jacket inside out and sew up the side seams. A good rule of thumb is to align the pieces at the wrists and armpits when you pin them. Even with all the rough edges, you can really see it coming together. Much like we did for the sleeves, the bottom hem of the jacket also needs a cuff. So gather the fabric to the right length, sew, fold it over, and use a top stitch to make it lay nice and flat. Off camera, I sewed the two sides of the hood together at the curved edge, and now we can attach it to the collar of the jacket. I decided to sew it kind of like you would with a collar piece, wrong side to wrong side. That way when you flip it over, there's a more finished seam. Next, we can hem all around the outer perimeter of the front panels and hood. Off camera, I also added some zippers and this gold zipper pull, and attached the hood to the back of the jacket so that it stays in place. Voila! A cute little windbreaker! Next up, we have to make her a cute metallic pink skirt. I cut a long strip of fabric for the main skirt piece, and two smaller curved strips for the waistband. Sew the curved pieces together at the inner curve and down the sides, right sides facing in. Once you flip it around, you have a waistband. This fabric is very springy though, so much like I did for the jacket, I sewed a top stitch to help it lay flat. This fabric doesn't really unravel, but I wanted it to look nice, so I decided to hem the bottom of the skirt as well. The stitching will also help it match the waistband better, if that makes sense. Now it can be gathered and sewn to the waistband, good side to good side. You could also pleat this, but the springy nature of the fabric made me think it would look better if it's just gathered. Finally, close the skirt by sewing up the back seam. Here you can see how the curved waistband sits nice and flush against the doll's hips. With the skirt on the doll to measure, I pin a pink ribbon to the inside of the skirt. The purpose of this ribbon is to catch the crotch of the doll and keep the skirt from sliding up. If you sew this carefully, you can hide the stitches in the existing seams of the skirt. I lost some footage, but I also sewed a snap button at the back as a closure. Finally, we can make the t-shirt. Begin by sewing the darts into the front panel of the t-shirt and cut off the excess fabric. The back panels then get attached to the front panel at the shoulder seams, but this is where I lost some more footage, so I can't show you. I sew a shirt with long sleeves in more detail in this video. Even though the sleeves are long, the method for sewing the shirt together is the same, so please go check out that video if you want to see it in more detail. Anyway, now that the shirt is sewn, we can add the print. I drew up this ombre apple logo with the cursive hello that iMac G3s displayed on startup and printed it on some heat transfer paper. My concept art calls for a black hello, but I thought the pink one looked much nicer, so I chose to use one of those. Cut around the perimeter of the print, I chose to leave a small white border and decide where on the shirt it needs to go. Then you can peel off the backing paper and attach it with heat. Typically you'd use an iron for this, but because the shirt is so small, I'm just using my mini straightener. It's so cute, I wish I could get a shirt like this in real life. Because we'll be replacing it with an iMac, we need to remove the doll's head. Dunk them into some freshly boiled water to soften the vinyl and make it easier to remove. Protect your hands with a cloth or something and squeeze out any excess water. Next, squish and wiggle the vinyl of the head to coax it over the first bump in the neck peg. Normally you'd have to pull it off the side pegs too, but this time the entire head just popped off in one go. We also need to remove the neck peg itself. Normally I just cut it smaller, but because I'm replacing their head entirely, I decided to convert the neck into something more like a BJD neck joint. You might need to use a variety of tools to get the peg out without damaging the neck or the horizontal bar on the inside. You can see here I actually cut it off using my rotary tool. This leaves a ring of plastic on the inside though, so I had to use some cuticle nail clippers to cut it open. You never know what weird tools you might need in this hobby. How do people, oh. That's how. Oh no. I spoke. Ah, there we go. There we go. This way you have access to the horizontal bit of plastic to use as an anchor. For this next bit, you'll need some kind of hook. So I bent a piece of jewelry wire into a curve and slipped it inside the neck. If it's pliable enough, you can kind of push it through to the other side and grab it with your pliers to pull it out even further. Now you can bend it into a hook and tie a piece of thread around it. Then it's as simple as pulling it back the other way until you're left with just the embroidery thread. Take a small elastic band, hook the wire around one side of it, and the embroidery thread around the other. Then use the thread to pull it through to the other side. I noticed here that the elastic band is actually still too long, so I ended up folding it double and repeating the process. Once that's done, you should have an elastic band looped around the plastic bar inside the doll's neck and poking out on either side where you can grab it. Next, I want to remove Frankie's printed stitches, since I want our doll to lean more cyborg and less Frankenmonster. There are a few ways you can do this, but I opted for acetone since it's the fastest. Work in quick swipes and try not to go over the same spot too many times, since acetone melts plastic. The lower legs on these G3 dolls are made of some kind of vinyl that's different from the plastic on the rest of the body, so it's much harder to get the print off here. It's almost like the plastic gets stained. I tried sanding it, but it just made a big smudge. I'll have to figure out what to do about that later. Because I'm not doing a reroute or a face-up this time, I decided I want to do something fun with the doll's hands. So I grabbed a second pair of hands off a budget Frankie doll, which you can see here have a slightly different peg. But I think they'll work anyway. To reshape the hands, begin by separating the middle and ring finger with a sharp craft knife. This usually leaves a little seam, so I cleaned that up off camera. Grab some freshly boiled water and some ice water and dunk the hands first into the boiling water to soften them up. Be sure to keep some tweezers nearby in case they don't float like you expected them to. Ah! After a few minutes, you can take them out and start reshaping them. In this case, I'm trying to bend down the pinky and ring finger so that the hand makes a peace sign. Set the pose by dunking the hand into the ice water. Some hands are quite springy, so they might not stay down as much as you'd like, but we'll fix that in a bit. For the second pair of hands, I wanted to bend down all of the fingers except the index finger. Oh no. Oopsie. If you mess the pose up like I did here, you can always put the hand back into the boiling water and try again. There we go. That's better. Since the fingies didn't want to stay down fully, I put a little dot of super glue on them and tacked them down that way. But even that wasn't strong enough to contain the spring. So I ended up cutting notches in the joints to make it easier for the fingers to bend and gluing them again with a 2-part epoxy glue. This glue doesn't dry nearly as fast, so I had to use clips to hold the fingers in place, but it's much stronger than super glue. Now she can make a peace sign and do this. Okay, on to what is arguably the most difficult and time-consuming part of this project. Her head. I'll be honest, I originally considered commissioning a 3D artist to sculpt it for me and have it 3D printed, but I recently learned that a lot of you guys are aspiring or newbie doll artists, and not everybody has access to that or the funds to do it, so instead I'm going to challenge myself and stubbornly hand make this with slightly more accessible materials to show you that you can too, if you want to. I was being ambitious and wanted her to have a working screen, so I bought this little MP4 player on AliExpress. It even has its own little camera. To start, measure the actual screen part of the MP4 player and create a little paper template of it. Then cover the entire thing in cling film. We're going to have to sculpt around it so that we can be sure it fits inside the head, so we need to protect it. I also covered it in masking tape just to be extra safe. Next, build up the shape with aluminium foil. We're going to make the computer head hollow, so this shape is going to act as the negative to that. I tried to get as close as possible to that cone shape that an iMac G3 has. Now we can go in with our sculpting medium. I'm using epoxy sculpt because I want to use it before it goes hard, which I recently learned can happen over time, apparently. But you can absolutely do this with a cheaper medium like air dry clay or even paper mache. Epoxy sculpt is a two-part medium, so wearing gloves to protect my hands, I mix equal parts of A and B together until it reaches an even color. Wrap a thin sheet of epoxy around the front of the shape you made, then use that paper template from earlier to cut an opening. This way the screen will show through, see? Once the entire shape is covered in epoxy, you can start to map out the details of the computer. These iMacs have a see-through white frame and a see-through shell in the back in another color, so I'm tracing along where those different parts would meet up. I'm also leaving an opening at the bottom since that's where the socket for the neck needs to go, and adding details like little cable holes and this handle for carrying the computer at the back. Set that aside to cure for a day or two, and then come back with sandpaper or an emery board to smooth out the surface and fix any mistakes or bumps. It looks a bit rough here, but I promise it'll look better soon. To make the holes and thin down the bigger parts of the shell, I used my rotary tool. Please excuse this piece of plastic in front of the camera. I ended up building a dust box because I couldn't stand the dust anymore. It was making my allergies go crazy. I wanted to cut out the holes on the handle with a wood cutting tool, but I broke it, so I ended up making a new one out of polymer clay. With everything else nice and smooth, we can make the neck joint. Ugh. Why can't this one stay nice like this one? Mix up another batch of epoxy, enough to fill the hole we left earlier. Press it into a relatively thin sheet and smooth it across the gap. Be sure to also smooth it out on the inside. Then, while the epoxy is still soft, make a dent in the middle. This took a bit of back and forth, and I used a combination of things to try and get the dent deep enough without tearing straight through the epoxy. Once you're happy with your dent, poke a hole in the middle of it with something sharp like a needle. It should look something like this. While I had my epoxy out, I also made little platforms inside both pieces in anticipation of adding magnets later. After curing and sanding, it looks like this. You can stop here, but for the sake of authenticity, I wanted it to be see-through. So I'm going to make a mold using this heat moldable plastic. It comes in little pellets that you can soften using boiling water. Once it's soft enough, you can squish it together into a bowl and make shapes with it. I'm using this brand specifically because it stays clear and rubbery even when it's cool, which is perfect for making UV resin molds. Once it's soft, you can wrap it around the object you're making a mold of and let it cool until it looks something like this. From there, it's as simple as carefully pouring in the UV resin and curing it under a lamp. It's not the worst thing I've ever made, but there are a lot of rough spots and spikes where the mold had like air bubbles and such, so it's gonna need quite a bit of sanding. I think the cleanest one is probably the carrying handle, but that might be because it's a smaller and flat shape. After a lot of sanding and drilling holes, we have this. As a final touch, we need to add pink resin to the little speakers and CD drive in the front here, so I'm using masking tape to seal it from behind. That way we can just pour the resin in and cure it. It did seep a little bit despite my best efforts with the masking tape though, so I need to go back in with another round of sanding. I also decided to fill this hole at the side with a more opaque white resin. In real life, this is like a port of sorts for cables and stuff to plug into, but our head is going to be hollow, so I decided to just fill it in. And finally, we can gloss these babies to give it that plastic fantastic feeling. The varnish isn't making them quite as glossy as I want. You can see here it's almost more satiny in some spots, and you can really see all of the imperfections. Before we do anything else, let's go ahead and glue the magnets in place with some tacky glue. In the end, I went over everything with a layer of clear resin to get it extra glossy. I also used some paint on the inside to brighten some parts up a bit where I didn't want them to be quite as see-through. Like here, where I wanted the front to have a more opaque section like the real iMacs have. Don't look too closely at the inside, it's kind of ugly in there. These iMacs came with the roundest mice you will ever see, and my partner gave me the amazing idea to turn it into her backpack. I drew the shape of it on a piece of paper, about the size I want her backpack to be, and stuck it to the underside of a glass bowl. This just gives me a stencil to work from where I sculpt the shape out of polymer clay. Start with a bowl and squish it down, thinning it out more towards the edges of the circle to make the main shape. It also helps if you swipe your fingers across it to smooth out any bumps. Next, place the stencil on top of the piece of clay to trace the rest of the shapes. I'm using a needle to poke through the paper along the lines I drew. Now I can finalize those shapes with a thin tool like my cuticle pusher. For these side pieces, I'm pushing it through the clay onto the glass because I really want them to be separate pieces eventually. I didn't go as deep with the line at the top because that's part of the middle piece. Cut out a smaller stencil in the shape of the Apple logo and gently push it into the clay to create an indent. Do the same for the little leaf at the top of the apple. It was too small to take out, so I just left it in there while I baked the clay. Next, we'll make a mold for it using some heat moldable plastic again. I've separated the middle part from the side pieces so I can make separate molds for them. Once cooled, carefully bend the mold to pull it away from the shape and pop it out. I think it came out pretty good, even though the apple didn't fill up all the way. Time to mix some resin again. Much like the head, the mouse consists of a clear white middle and clear plink, that's not a word, clear pink plastic at the sides. Pour that into the mold and cure under a UV lamp. If you're wondering why I use the foil, it's to help the UV light reflect back up so that we get a more even cure. You can use a mirror for this too. So, note to self, this is heat activated plastic, which means that when it gets hot, it gets soft. And resin can get hot while it's curing. Oh no. Don't be like me. Wait in between. Let it cool off before you keep going, if it's not cured yet. The molds work really well though. Unfortunately, this first pass was way too white and opaque. I ended up replacing it with a much less opaque version later. They also had little imperfections and rough edges when they came out of the molds, so use sandpaper or emery boards and sanding blocks to get them nice and smooth. I also used my rotary tool to hollow out the Apple logo in the areas where the mold didn't take. For the actual backpack, I got this cool blue vinyl that I thought would be perfect because it reminded me of those plastic inflatable chairs that were popular in the 90s and 2000s. I used some tacky glue to attach the resin pieces to the front of the backpack. The circles I cut out are the same size as the mouse, so they line up perfectly. It needs to be shiny though, so I ended up giving it a layer of clear resin like I did for the head and colored the apple in with my pink acrylic marker off camera. For her shoes, I decided to repaint these G3 Claudine sneakers I already had because it's been a goal of mine to consume less and use more of what I already own. Their shape reminds me of those clear bubble shoes that the Japanese brand Gurls make. Their shoes are designed to harken back to the late 90s and early 2000s while still being futuristic, and so they fall within what is known as Y3K fashion. I thought this was fitting for our doll. The brand actually sells minis of these on keychains, but sadly I don't live in Japan, so... After a few layers of white, we can go in with some color. I painted the tongue of the shoe blue to match the doll's skin tone, and used some light pink and purple on the other areas of the shoe. Those bubble shoes often have something iridescent or shiny on them, so I painted the soles of the shoes, which would be the bubbly part, with a darker metallic purple. To match the gold zipper pull on her jacket, I decided to make the shoelaces gold as well. They look so cute! Once everything is dry, seal your work with a coat of varnish. I ended up making her this sock to cover up the dark smudges on her legs, but I left the foot part out so that the shoes would fit properly. The last thing I had to do was to make her a face. But because this isn't your typical fashion doll, I did this by drawing a few different facial expressions and saving them on the memory card in the little MP4 player that's going to be her screen. Here she is. Now all we need to do is put her together, and with that, our iMac G3 girl is done. So, what do you think? Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm quite proud of what I managed to accomplish with this doll. She's far from perfect, and I will be the first to admit that. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement where her head is concerned. But for a first time making an item head doll from scratch, I think I did okay. And overall, I really like her. I might be biased because I have such nostalgia for the time period that inspired her though. What do you think of her? Is there anything you would change? Let me know in the comments down below. I actually think her jacket is my favorite part. I didn't mention it before, but this is definitely the clothing item with the most individual pattern pieces that I've made before. And I think it's my first time making functioning pockets, so that was a lot of fun. I decided to call this doll Pixel, but spelled kind of techy, you know? My headcanon for her is that she's friends with my Terabytes doll. They're both kind of cyborg-like, and I used the G3 Frankie for Terra as well. But where Terra is kind of feral and crazy, Pixel is way more timid and grounded. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful or at the very least entertaining. Be sure to head over to Electric Bunny's channel to see the amazing doll that she made. It was so cool to see them side by side like this. We didn't know what the other was making until pretty late into our projects, so it's cool to see how many accidental similarities there are between our dolls. It's also cool that they're still very different, even though they share the same concept. If you like this video and you think I deserve it, please leave a like or comment below and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like this one. And if you'd like to see exclusive content or join my Discord server, click the join button to become a member. More than anything, I hope that wherever you are in the world right now, you're staying safe. It's scary out there at the moment, and there are things happening in the world that I wouldn't think possible in this day and age. But I think as long as we have hope and there are still good people out there, everything is going to turn out okay eventually. So for now, stay safe, keep hope, and as always, stay golden. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.